Let's bring you this discussion now. The suspension of Johannesburg's top prosecutor, Andrew Chauke, is drawing significant attention. Former KZN Hawks boss, Johan Booysen, says it sends a clear message that prosecutors who act unlawfully will face the consequences. Now, Chauke, the South Gauteng Director of Public Prosecutions, was suspended this week amid serious allegations. Let's bring in former KZN Hawks boss, Johan Booysen. Johan, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. And I've had a read through the statement that you've made in the wake of Chauke's suspension. You say it will send a strong message to errant prosecutors, but does it also not send a message that, goodness, the wheels of justice do turn slowly?
Good afternoon, Michelle, and thank you for having me. Yes, indeed. I mean, Advocate Shamila Batoy, the NDPP, had requested the president, I think about 2 years ago, to suspend Advocate Chauke, and he was suspended last week after 2 years. So indeed, the wheels of justice had been turning a bit slow.
So let's take us back to 2012 and your arrest, Johan, and Chauke's involvement in that case against you, which we know now was on the back of a series of discredited articles published in the Sunday Times. It was subsequently set aside, the decision to prosecute you. But just take us through what unfolded back then and what I imagine would have been a major impact on your life now, 13 years later.
Michelle, my component was responsible for investigating a major corruption case which involved senior police officers, generals, a businessman in KwaZulu-Natal who had links with the then president of South Africa, Mr. Jacob Zuma, his son being Edward. It turned out during the investigation that there had been a quid pro quo for certain contracts that were awarded to this businessman. I was placed under pressure to stop the investigation, and with our discussions with my then national head at Anwar Dramat, and we agreed that the investigation should proceed. And at one stage, they tried to bribe me with 2 million rand. I set up a sting operation during which a police colonel was arrested after they placed just under 1.5 million rand in the boot of my car. And then subsequently, there was the now discredited Sunday Times story that I was effectively running a death squad. We established afterwards how that came into being. To cut a long story short, there was a group of prosecutors under the leadership of Advocate Nonkowo Jiba at the time. Chauke was one of them, albeit on the background, that connived to have myself and the Cape Manor detectives prosecuted for racketeering. Now, we appeared close to over 20 times in court. A judge had ruled that my prosecution was unlawful in that there was no evidence to link me to the commission of any crime. But despite that, they proceeded with prosecuting me. And eventually, when Advocate Batoy became the NDPP, she had the matter reviewed by 4 senior prosecutors from my office, who then issued a damning report called the Lecoq Report, which established and demonstrated how those prosecutors connived and lied to have myself and the Cape Manor detectives prosecuted.
I mean, you talked about, rogue prosecutors within the NPA. You've opened various criminal cases, in fact, as well, against these quote-unquote rogue prosecutors. How far did that ever get, Johan?
I have, Michelle. So I opened those cases in 2016. Now, the listeners would recall that when the charges against myself were set aside in 2015, Mr. Nkasana was appointed as the head of the National Prosecuting Authority. And it was during his tenure that Advocate Jiba was prosecuted for perjury for making a false statement in the court proceedings wherein I applied to have the matter against myself reviewed and set aside. However, once he had done that, he was discarded off and he was replaced by Advocate Sean Abrams, who then withdrew the charges against Jiba and re-prosecuted myself. In any event, during that when charges was eventually withdrawn against Advocate Jiba, Freedom Under the Law and the Helen Suzman Foundation took that matter on review. It was during those proceedings that Advocate Abrams and Marshal Mogatle made affidavits stating that it was Marshal Mogatle who had withdrawn those charges, whereas 3 judges in the High Court found and held that it was indeed Shaun Abrams who withdrew the charges. I opened perjury charges against Advocate Abrams and Advocate Mogatle. The charges that are laid against Advocate Mahema relates to blatant lies and fabrications that he presented in a prosecution memorandum, which he presented to Advocate Abrams to reauthorize my prosecution. As we speak, those dockets are with the Investigative Directorate under the leadership of Advocate Andrea Johnson. I've engaged with her extensively in the last couple of years to get this matter to go forward. I've had a recent meeting with him after the suspension of Advocate Chauke, and I'm positive that this matter will now receive the attention that it warrants.
Sure. I mean, it would be laughable if it weren't so incredibly serious. Chauke is obviously still going to be investigated, and the outcomes of that investigation still need to come to the fore. But yeah, it will also probe not only his fitness to hold office, but also his failure to continue with charges into Richard Ndluli, into his involvement in the murder of Oupa Ramagibe. But everything that you've outlined to us, Johan, over a course of how many years? 15 years or so? Shaun Abrams, everything that the NPA has been through, do you reckon that it goes some way to explaining where we are now and where the National Prosecuting Authority is now, even under new leadership? But, you know, the way that it's struggled, for example, to prosecute state capture cases successfully. It talks about being under-resourced. There have been some embarrassing decisions in the court. I mean, you talked about the fact that there were still remnants of the old MPA, these rogue prosecutors that you talked about, that they were still there within the National Prosecuting Authority. Do you think that's still the case?
Michelle, I would just like to also, and I don't want to defend Advocate Batoy, but she inherited a broken organization. And at the conclusion of my testimony at the Zondo Commercial Inquiry, I indicated to the chairperson, Advocate Judge Zondo, that unless the remnants of the then Juba faction are addressed, that institution will remain captured. And unfortunately, those were prophetic words. It turned out that the very advocates or the prosecutors that myself and others like McBride and a few other witnesses testified about, that they did indeed undermine the efforts by Shamela Batoy to reform the National Prosecuting Authority. She did request the president to suspend Chauke more than 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I just need to add, Michelle, you know, it's very easy to blame the National Prosecuting Authority, but they can only be as good as the dockets that are presented to them by the Hawks and by the police detectives. So it's not only the National Prosecuting Authority that should take the blame. It's also the investigative capacity of law enforcement.
And I suppose also the length of time it's taken President Cyril Ramaphosa to take the step that he has taken following that letter from Shamela Batoy to the president.
Yeah, well, the reason for that escapes me.
Yeah. So, Johan, how does this impact you now? You know, after all these years, it brings you, I suppose, closer to closure. But I imagine that the reputational harm to yourself at the time and in the years after would have been incredibly difficult, and this must be bittersweet.
Michelle, imagine yourself in my position. I'm a police general. I'm seated at provincial headquarters. I'm arrested, handcuffed in front of my personnel, dragged down the passage, put into the lift, then taken home where my house is searched, where they rummaged through my wife's cupboard. I was driving into the office the following morning, just after the investigation started, with my names on all the billboards in KwaZulu-Natal. Through the nature of the work that I've been doing over a couple of decades in KwaZulu-Natal, I was a known entity. And for the next moment to be made out to be this corrupt murderer it had a hell of an impact on myself and my family. It was very difficult, but as you said in the beginning, the wheels of justice are turning, albeit very slowly.
Very unfortunately so. And now we wait for the inquiry into Chauke's fitness to hold office to give us even more answers. Johan Booysen, former KwaZulu-Natal Hawks boss, thanks very much for joining us this Sunday.